Yay. Are we
Yay.
live? Is it
We
working?
I
It
think
is,
So
but not on LinkedIn because our
excited.
provider and LinkedIn do not see eye to eye about every 30, 60, 90 days. I feel like we should just talk about like API tokens and how those consistently cause problems.
yep.
Unsubscribe. I unsubscribed.
APIs are. This is not the first time this has happened, but hopefully it will be the last time. Thank you, Drew, as always, for guiding us through these last-minute technical issues. But I am glad that we're at least on YouTube. But hello, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Talk. I know we have a few familiar faces today. Ryan and Mick are both away, so we have some special guests. And I figured we could start off and just kind of go around and introduce everyone. So I guess, Katie, if you want to go first and just let everyone know who you are and what you do.
Cool. Thanks for the intro, Audra, and thank you for having me. I am very excited to have an almost all-female cast on a podcast. I feel like doesn't
Good
happen.
job,
I'm sorry,
Drew.
Drew. I'm very. We need someone to do the technical stuff. My name is Katie Brown. I I work at Splunk. I am the director of security interlock, which is as confusing of a title as it is a position. I've been at Splunk 5 years now, I think. And before coming to Splunk, I came from the customer space, and most of my career has been spent working as a SOC analyst.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit later with one of our stories. I'm excited to have your perspective. And Haylee, go ahead and introduce yourself. I know this isn't your first time on the show, but for anyone just now joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Haylee Mills. I am a security strategist over here at Splunk. I usually move my glasses when I do that, but I got LASIK a few weeks ago. But yeah, past life, way past life as an animator drawing cartoons and not getting enough money to survive in Los Angeles, but then a SOC analyst to SOC engineer to PowerPoint slides for SOC engineers, which is what I do now.
It's a great description. And of course, Drew Church, you might recognize Drew as our producer. And I'm very excited to have Drew on for the entirety of our show. He's also producing and talking at the same time. So very excited to have you and your multitasking on. But for anyone that's just now joining, can you tell us a bit about yourself also?
So I've been at Splunk almost 4 years, and like Haylee, I do PowerPoints and Google Slides for a living. Before joining Splunk, I worked as a security practitioner. My last job was leading a SOC for one of the Navy's largest commands, and this is kind of a special treat for me because I'm about getting ready to leave for 10 months to go be on a ship. Turns out being in the reserves means sometimes you have to leave home. So I'm pretty excited about that.
We're going to miss you.
We're going to miss you, Drew.
Yeah, but the audience won't, that's for sure. We've got some really great people stepping in to help us out.
We do. We will have Daniela on as our producer in the next several months. So looking forward to that also. But with all the introductions, I know we have a lot of news to get to. So let's go ahead and get started with our news clip. All right, so our first story actually has two parts, and this was something we just found out about yesterday. Microsoft apparently is dealing with two different leaks, data leaks. The first was a report about more than 100 redacted documents about Xbox. These are files related to the FTC's case against Microsoft, which were uploaded to a court website, unredacted, which appears to be an error, and it has a whole bunch of information about the future plans for Xbox products. And an FTC spokesperson actually told NBC News that Microsoft was responsible for this error and it wasn't an FTC error. If you're not familiar with the background, this is a lawsuit. The FTC voted to file a challenge to block Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, which is a video game holding company. And the allegation with that is that Microsoft could use Xbox products to suppress competitors. But it looks like where this stands, a court may have denied an FTC emergency appeal to block this merger. So that was the last update I saw from the case in July. So obviously an error potentially here. And then the second one I wanted to mention is Wiz blog yesterday saying that they found 38 terabytes of data that was accidentally exposed on Microsoft AI's Microsoft's AI GitHub. And so this is, more than 30,000. It's a lot of data. More than 30,000 internal Microsoft Teams messages. This was apparently in a disk backup for 2 employee workstations, and that was shared using a misconfigured SAS token. And researchers are warning that, with the developments with AI, we could see this as a new security issue with, large amounts of data that's used to train AI and the security implications of misconfigurations, right? So I'm curious what
If
you
only
make
there
of this.
was like some sort of like paperclip shaped mascot to tell you when you're about to share 38 terabytes,
Right?
basically publicly.
Yeah, yeah. It just goes to show that there can be accidental things, right? Like this, not just always malicious, and sometimes small things can lead to big errors, right?
Yeah, that's
And
a
that's,
big
I was like joking, but also somewhat serious that like I think a lot of things, especially like with cloud and access level permissions, if there were just some little checks that were like, are you sure you want to do that? Because that means this. Somehow,
Right.
like, I mean, sometimes customers run SPL queries that are a little out of control. And just little checks and balances, and maybe that's what we can use AI for. Like
Right. Because
just
you don't
little
want to
baby.
be you don't want that to be your error, right? Because everyone makes mistakes, but you just don't want it to be at that magnitude, right? Because everyone messes up sometimes or overlooks something, and human error is guaranteed. So definitely having checks in place, I think, could be really helpful with that.
I think there was also some not good hygiene from their SAS token perspective. They were set to expire in like 2051 or something. So I feel like there were a couple elements of like avoidability for this
Right.
case.
Right. Definitely some lessons learned, right? To take away for anyone else that's using, SAS tokens to share, with Azure directories and whatnot. So
Yeah, and since Kovar and Mick aren't here, and there's always one of them always says that we don't do victim blaming on this show. So I feel
right.
like as the
Drew,
token
yes.
Mick, I want to make sure, right, this could happen to literally anyone. And I think going
Right.
back to what you're saying, Haylee, about hey, if only there was a clip, paperclip shaped object that could possibly tell us about that, right? I've never personally shared any kind of blob storage on Azure myself. But I have on another leading cloud service provider that also starts with an A and ends with WS. And fundamentally, when you go to make like a bucket public, you have to do a lot of things to make that bucket public. And I have no doubt that when the users of Azure are doing that, I have no doubt that that's in place. But what I wonder if when you start running into kind of CI/CD pipelines and like traditional DevOps tooling, where you've got these chains that are committing code, right? If you don't have that tool chain properly configured, you probably have configured these pipelines to run that actually bypasses those controls, right? So sometimes automation is great, but I think sometimes automation can also cause us problems. I don't know that's what happened here, but I could easily imagine that some of those preventative controls that we've tried to prevent humans from doing harm to themselves don't work when the robots get involved.
Yeah,
Let me,
definitely.
let me just say this as a former employee of Sony, I will never throw shade for any breach that anyone has to deal with ever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It
I'm
could
so
happen to
glad
anyone.
the no victim blaming policy, because it's something that I've seen amongst security people. I think a lot of us get sort of like, oh, I would have XYZ, but in the complexities of a modern environment and just like day to day 9 to 5ing, there's just going to be spots we miss. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's move on now to our next story, because this is a big one from this past week and going into this week. Of course, you've probably heard about 2 major breaches involving Las Vegas hotel or casino chains, MGM, and then also Caesars. And so we're learning a little bit more about this. Okta's chief security officer did an interview with Reuters and said that the cyber criminal group behind these 2 breaches actually broke into the systems of 3 other Okta clients in the manufacturing, retail, and technology space. So that's the update there. And the groups behind this, there's a group called Scattered Spider and then another group called Alph V. And there was some confusion initially, at least for me, about are these groups the same? Is it a subgroup? But the Okta CSO said that they are believed to work in coordination with one another. So they're like affiliate groups. And so they have claimed responsibility for this incident. And Mandiant actually released a blog with some really great information about scattered spider TTPs. And they're well known to use social engineering for initial access. And the CSO at Okta actually said that this matches a pattern that they've seen over the last several months of Okta customers noticing impersonation attempts of employees trying to convince help desks to provide them duplicate access to accounts. So that's one of the primary ways that they're able to gain initial access. And Okta did confirm that this group was able to access its client. So they were then able to access even more credentials. And I want to point out, too, that our threat research team responded to this very quickly and put out a bunch of security content to stay ahead of this. And so I have a link here that I can share in the chat. And this is a link to a tweet that has a whole bunch of links that you can look at if you're trying to learn more about TTPs and detections, things like that. But yeah, this has definitely caused a lot of chaos. I mean, some of the news reports I saw in the casinos, a lot of us were just in Vegas in August. So it's interesting to see that.
Yeah, one of the things that's... Oh, go for it, Haylee.
Oh, I was just going to say what's interesting, too, is them hacking Caesars. And Caesars like, here's $15 million. MGM not doing that. And This is what happened.
Right. And in that post that they made, they said that if we're not able to reach MGM, then we might launch another attack or threatening even further action because they said they still had access. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But that was the claim from these groups. And there was also some interviews, like one interview of a purported scattered spider member, and then the group disputed that that was actually a member of these groups. And when you're dealing with cyber criminals, you can't always just take them for their word. So it's difficult from a reporting perspective of do you take this interview and run with it? Do you have to add the caveat that it might not be who they say they are? I don't know. It's very complicated. So yeah.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, right, as we've talked internally a lot amongst the practitioners and the various security personalities, as well as experts at Splunk, the thing that kind of came up time and time again, at least from my perspective, is people get really hot to trot over seeing like the word Okta, right? Like, hey, they did something wrong with Okta. Well, actually, did they, or did Okta provide the service that allowed them to run their identity platform, to allow authorization, right? Have multi-factor authentication, all those security controls that we talk all the time about. Okta, as far as we can tell, did nothing wrong. But people are like, I literally saw somebody like, oh, so we're going to put puts on Okta? Like, come on, this is not Okta's fault, right? Just like we saw Active Directory, like everyone's like, oh, Active Directory got breached. Like, well, not really. There was no vulnerability. It's just it was somebody misconfigured the thing, or somebody, like in this case, social engineering. We're one of the Surge members, James Hodgkinson, sorry, James, actually was like, hey, what if we did identity verification, hey, to like reset any kind of super user password in Okta, you had to hop on a Zoom or you had to hop on a Teams call and like face-to-face ID check, right? To just kind of have that level of administrative or personnel control to prevent things like that. I was like, that's a really simple and relatively low-tech way to kind of prevent that, right? But it's an administrative control instead of a technical one. And I wonder if that's something that our audience could maybe do in their own worlds, to just say, hey, how do we prevent this from happening to ourselves?
Yeah, misconfigurations definitely can be all it takes to get access and then run from it. So,
and I know that there are... Oh, go ahead, Katie. Go ahead.
I'm chomping at the bit to get this information out there. They released the person that's responsible for all of this. It's George Clooney.
Spreading conspiracies.
Oh, you've been dying to make an Ocean's 11 joke.
They're filming for Ocean's 15.
Yeah. Well, in that interview, they said that they had never seen the Ocean's franchise. They had never seen any of those movies. I'm like, well, definitely there's some parallels.
Well, it'd be a lot more of a boring movie if they just called help desk and then shut down the casino.
Yeah. And like, and also, I wonder, did the help desk do anything wrong, or did the person actually work through whatever processes and controls they had there, right? Like, hey, right, when you think about all these data breaches, information, maybe like selectors that they had to like uniquely identify these people, like we're out there on the, we'll say open market, whether that is on the quote unquote dark web or not, with all these personnel record breaches, et cetera. It's pretty hard to pick a kind of secure, like, hey, how do I identify myself? Like, what's my first car? Like, I have put that into probably 1,000 different systems.
Right.
Yeah, and then just address and things that is so easily available that uh, it also makes me think of, I know for sure that Okta has logs about the device that logged in, and first time seen device is still a like obviously you can't alert on that directly, but there's this magical thing called RPA that might be really good at it, risk-based alerting. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but
For those keeping score at home, 16 minutes 34 seconds to the first RBA mention.
And we're not done yet. So.
Yeah. We've got a
yeah,
colleague.
there's more where that came from.
We have a colleague
Sure,
that the Derek Lawson. He talks all the time about commerce, right? He has a big background with that, and so we jokingly call it the mean time to commerce, or MTTC. I think I'm gonna need to come up with a new metric for you, Haley. MTTR, mean time to RBA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I like that.
16, that's probably a record for me, really.
I'd say so.
All right. Well, we have another story, and this one Haley brought to my attention, which I actually missed because I was off last week. So thanks for calling this one out. This was a tweet from VX Underground about the Lockbit ransomware group, and they recently issued a poll. Apparently, this group to all of their affiliates, asking about their ransomware negotiation policy, and so they're actually considering new rules about how much they can demand in a ransom. And the concern, apparently, according to this tweet, was that newer affiliates are giving too large of discounts. They're too desperate to get paid, so they go lower, whereas the more experienced affiliates might be more adept at like hardball negotiations. So John DiMaggio, who's a security researcher, tweeted that Lockbit may have decided to only accept ransom payments of 1.5 to 3%. And so he actually talked with people involved in these negotiations on the victim side who say that these new rules may actually backfire, because if an organization considers that range to be way too high, they might just immediately revert to plan B instead of negotiating, which from a cyber criminal standpoint could be not good in the long term. So one of the other things in the VX Underground tweet was there's a subgroup of Lockbit called National Hazard Agency, which I've never heard of, but they said they'll no longer accept payments under 3%. And that if anyone approaches them with an offer below 3%, they're going to automatically destroy the company's data, which I don't know if that's just all talk and, trying scare tactics, but it is interesting to see these like internal meetings almost of like, what are we going to do to be more effective? Because I would say Lockbit is probably the most organized from what I've seen for ransomware groups in terms of operating like a corporation, with having these meetings and a bug bounty program and other things in place that are very similar to what you'd see at a company.
They've gotten very organized.
I really wonder when the next QBR is going to be for Lockbit, right? Like, when are they going to put out slides and say, hey, here's what our forecast is. We're a little under that. What are we going to do to kind of pump those numbers up?
Those are rookie numbers.
Exactly. Get those numbers up. Which, like, what a world we live in that, like, we have to barter with extortionists and come up with, like, a feasible price. Which, by the way, there have been several instances where a company will shell out millions of dollars to get their data back, in the the adversaries like delete.
Oh, so yeah, you can't take them for their word.
Yeah,
exactly. Or they might extort them again. Who knows? I mean, if they gained access to your network once, what's going to stop them from trying again, especially if you don't, completely fix everything after the fact.
I remember the good old days where I worked somewhere that got ransomed twice through the same pathway. And the second time they were like, just so you know, here's how we got in and here's how you can protect yourself, with like a link to an article.
Yeah, they do that where it's like, they're like looking
like,
out for you.
Those were the good old days.
Yeah.
It was just a friendly little
when criminals
ransom
had integrity.
Yeah.
Yes, it's an oxymoron. Criminal integrity. Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, the cost of downtime can be more expensive than the ransom demand. And I guess from a cyber criminal point of view, it's like, what's the sweet spot? Especially for the type of company that you target too, that they're, big enough to pay a ransom, but not too big to have like the more, advanced IT, architecture, for instance, and settings in place, things like that, or having a team to monitor networks, things like that. So, yeah, definitely interesting. I always am interested to see what researchers are seeing with ransomware groups and their internal conversations, and like the Conti leaks, for instance. You remember that, when we got to see like some of their internal messages and how they communicate, and just a lot of insight that you wouldn't otherwise get.
And they even had documents around like finding the right number for
Yeah.
like, it's like, don't look just at their revenue, look at their sort of like expenses and revenue. Because if you way go over, they can't feasibly operate with giving you. It was so interesting, just these little
Yeah.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder when Netflix is gonna put out the first like behind the scenes with a ransomware operator. I'm sure like instead of like Drive to Survive for Formula One with the race car drivers, there's gonna be ransomware operators and the affiliates inside a Lockbit. You know, this team really is going. This is their tire strategy, and this other team, this tire. It's mind blowing the way that this stuff works. I kind of wonder, like, do people have a plan B? Right? Is the takeaway for this for a small medium business that might get ransomed, like, really, you're probably not going to be able to pay this, right? Going back to what Haley's saying, right? There's revenue, and then there's actually cash on hand and the availability to pull credit and those types of things. It probably makes sense. And the way I think about it is like, hey, you should probably have a plan B because you may not get that data back and you may not have the decryptor, and just start there. And then what about the regulations and the rules they're trying to put in and saying, hey, you can't pay ransomware payouts.
Right.
Like,
Which is sort of fair because we don't want to enable this activity. We don't want this activity to be successful and for people to make money. And also, if you need your files back, you need your files back. So it's sort of a weird line between the two.
Yep. And the more profitable, the more prevalent it's going to be. And it's just a cycle that snowballs, or at least it feels like it's snowballing. But anyway, those are the news stories for today. On a depressing note, we'll go ahead and take a look at our upcoming events. We have a few things coming up that are worth highlighting. Oh, and the security detail. If you haven't heard, this is a new podcast we launched. Kirsty Payne and myself, we co-host this every other Wednesday. We talk about the threat landscape in different industries. We have an episode coming out next week, I believe. Is it next week or this week? Why am I forgetting? It is tomorrow that we have an episode coming out. And this one is from the Cloud Security Alliance. I'm actually really excited about this interview. We talked all about everything cloud security and some of the takeaways from their research at the Alliance. And it was a great interview. I talked with Sean Heidi, who is their threat researcher specific to cloud security. And I learned a lot from it. So I hope others will as well. And it's a hot topic right now, especially with the Storm 0558 report, which we'll touch on a little bit later in our deep dive, and a lot of questions about cloud security, both from an endpoint perspective and then also from a provider standpoint. So that's coming up for our next episode. And then I think we have a couple other events. David Bianco, he's speaking at a conference in Georgia on October 6th, so next month. And then Shannon Davis, and I think we might also have James Hodgkinson joining him for this conference in Australia. They're going to be presenting their Google Chrome extension research there, which is a great project. And Conf, which is in June, right, Drew?
we verified
Yes.
today.
Triple verified.
Yeah, we triple checked. Conf is in June of 2024 at the Venetian in Las Vegas. So mark your calendars if you have not already. And be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, splunk.com/surge. You'll get alerts anytime we initiate a rapid response for any major security incidents. And we have our quarterly newsletter with Wombat Facts. So highly recommend signing up for that as well. And with that, I think we can go ahead and move on now to our charity challenge, which I'm really looking forward to.
And now, Splunk's Cybersecurity 60-Second Charity Challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck!
Okay.
It was good to hear his voice, wasn't it? Like, we
It
just had
was.
gone an entire episode without hearing Kovar talk, and we got a little drop in there.
Yes. It wouldn't be complete without at least one Kovar reference. So, but our challenge today is inspired by a conversation on Slack with Drew that turned into kind of a hot take talk, which I always appreciate when people have opinions and we can go back and forth and maybe not make any progress, but we can go back and forth.
I love arguing. It's perfect to
Yes.
have opinions.
Exactly. And this all stemmed from an alert from Apple. They pushed out, I think, an emergency security update recently about a new zero-click exploit that was being used to deliver Pegasus spyware. So obviously concerning when you hear that's happening. And this was 2 new 0 days that are leveraged in this like attack chain. And so that started a discussion about how important is it to always update your phone when you get a security update. or a software update, which often includes security components. And, I think when we talk about the general public, that's not always the case with regular updates. And what's the likelihood of some sort of iOS vulnerability or mobile device vulnerability affecting the average person? And so that's kind of where we went with this. And I'm thinking, Drew, do you want to go first with your thoughts on updates?
Absolutely not. I want someone else to go first. But specifically, what charity are we going to be donating to whomever happens to win? Does the winner pay or does the loser pay? Or do we not have any losers?
That's actually a good question.
I think the loser always pays.
First of all, how many people do we have competing? Because I'm not even really clear on that with the number.
I'm competing for some reason.
Well, you have an opinion, so of course you are.
I feel like it's me.
Okay.
Is that right?
This, Katie.
Okay.
You got
Yes.
this, Katie.
I'm ready.
Destroy
You're going down,
him.
Drew.
Yes.
I don't know what we're talking about.
You don't? Oh, well, that'll make this even more interesting. I guess the prompt is, what is your stance on, from the perspective of your average person who maybe doesn't work in cybersecurity or isn't thinking about cybersecurity on a regular basis, how concerned should they be about these, emergency security updates, and what is like their threat model when it comes to this? How should they right away hit update? Are they okay skipping it? Because I know a lot of people do. They're worried about like battery drain, things like that, maybe decreased performance. I'm just taking all of Drew's points, but concerns like that might prohibit someone from responding quickly, right? I don't know. What do we think about that?
I feel like I want Drew to go first, and then I'll come with the retort.
Okay, so I am going to do this the Kovar way, which is to say I have written nothing out and have planned nothing. So hopefully I will. Wait, he always loses, so.
Oh, and I wanted to say the charity. So this week our
yeah.
charity is the Morocco Earthquake Relief Fund, and this was from an earthquake earlier this month. And so this is the charity for today. And I'm sorry, Katie, are you going first, or are we doing?
I think I am.
You are? Okay, sorry to interrupt. So go ahead.
Oh, I have to this is awkward because I have to click the button for myself to start the timer. This is new. And then I'm just going to pay attention to this clock and completely screw this up. But enough vamping, and let's go. All right, so I think that the big picture that anyone needs to understand is that normal people that aren't us and aren't watching this broadcast fundamentally do not care about cybersecurity at all. It is something that is in kind of the background of them. As we were talking about the call today, we talked about cyber hygiene and the importance of doing things like updating our phones, updating our wearables, updating the firmware on our routers, and making sure our PCs reboot. But just like the ring in a bathtub, right? Like that indicates, hey, somebody should probably clean that. It's not an emergency. Yeah, maybe it's a little gross. Maybe it's not a great idea. But fundamentally, it doesn't matter to them, right? Their device is a means to an end, and the security of that device is relatively unimportant. I think Katie's going to make the pitch here that, hey, well, what if the neighbor, that vulnerability could be exploited by the neighbor to see everything of the phone, the contents of the phone, and fundamentally, the neighbor isn't that skilled, so they're not going to get access to the pictures. I think we failed completely at making this problem important to the general population of computer users, and I don't know how to solve that, so I'll just have opinions instead.
All right. So I definitely see your point of view, Drew, but let's go ahead and see
Me
what
too.
Katie has to say.
Ready, Katie?
I'm ready.
All right.
I didn't know it was. Yeah, go for it. I didn't know there was a 60-second timer, so I'll go quick. I'm ready.
Surprise.
It's the 60
Probably told me
second
and I forgot.
charity challenge. Remember, 60-second charity challenge is in the name.
That's fair. Yep, that's
All
fair.
right.
I set myself up. Go for it.
And go.
So my argument is, although these individual instances of, I don't really care about this update, or this isn't a big deal, or if I skip it this time, that mentality and that sort of willful naivete can be extrapolated to all things security related. So it really is a matter of not advocating for willful naivete for security practices, right? It's just kind of enforcing bad security hygiene. And where that happens, locally on your phone at home, those are the same folks that are going into work and doing clickies on emails when they're not supposed to, because I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's not a really big, not that big of a deal. So there you go, less than 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh,
Fair.
Well done. Well done. So do I have like a retort? Is this like Robert's Rules of Debate or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, go for it. What's your response?
You're absolutely right, Katie. Right. I think the fundamental truth, and we're hoping, right, that people will vote and say who won, and it was objectively me. I think it's really important to understand, like, you're completely right. Right. Those things matter, and though I think not updating your phone, not making sure that your computer reboots and the patches apply, etc., are all systematic problems that cause an increased threat to the organization they work for. But fundamentally, and I think this kind of goes back to, and it's probably different in different geographies, but like, I think the opinion is, so what? That's not my problem. And I don't know how to solve that. And I really wish I did, because I think we could make the world a much more cyber safe place. We would not have adversaries that are able to use home routers as springboards to conduct nation state level attacks against nations that can't defend themselves, or ransomware operators pivoting from this computer that they're able to then go ransom a casino or whatever, right? I really wish we could solve that problem. I just don't know how to get the average person to care about this issue. I'm passionate about it, right? I'm a vulnerability guy. I want all the things patched constantly. Let's pretend that I didn't Nessa scan my house over the weekend, but like, I don't know how to get my kids and my wife to care about that.
That's fair. That's fair. There's
Yeah,
like a realist approach, but it's also like responsibility. We talked about that a little bit too. Like, where does the responsibility fall when it comes to breaches? If someone's social engineered, is it their fault or is it the organization's fault, right? Like, there's always this kind of debate about that. But what were you gonna say, Haylee?
Oh, I was just thinking while Drew was talking about how, like, we talked about how Apple's switching to opt out for security updates, which I think is like one way of being like, okay, well, we'll like make them take their medicine type thing. But then I'm like, oh, but then to Katie's point, it's almost like a missed opportunity for like education, but like that's not how they're pushed right now. It's just like security update, or it's bug fix. Like nobody cares about that. But if there's ways to talk about things that get people interested in those things, that I think like presentation of an update is also something that could be considered, and you miss out on that education opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think with updates, the whole point is to make it an easier experience for the user. And it's not all security. There's like new features and just different, functional bugs that are fixed that aren't a security risk. But it's like, if your weather app isn't working, which was one of the ones that was fixed in an update that I did a little research about this. I was just trying to figure out like what is included in some of the recent updates. And, some of them it's, Wi-Fi, searching for Wi-Fi on your device. You could have an update that fixes that, which to me is a much more significant issue than like potential battery drain for 48 hours while your phone adjusts to an update. Because typically the battery drain is short-lived, except for that one, issue about Apple inserting a tool into its update that actually caused phones to run at like 58% of the normal speed, which is probably lost some customer trust there. But
yeah, thank you for making my point for me. Right, like I think the idea there is like there are so many reasons to not, that I think the inertia about not is probably outweighs it. And so I think to Haley's point about how can we use this as an opportunity to educate people as to why this matters. I'm sure that there's really smart people working on that. And if you are a person that is working on that, I would love to hear from you, because you're clearly smarter and better at this than I am. And I would love to get your message out for you, or help you get your message out, I should say.
The one other thing is, I do wonder when we hear about, pretty advanced exploits, like a zero-click Pegasus spyware type exploit that makes national headlines. I mean, that's a big story because there's a human rights component, right? The people who are targeted, while they're not the majority, it's still a really worrisome thing if a dictatorship is able to get their hands on this and then use that for a population or a demographic or specific people that are against their administration or whatever. That could be a concern for everyone, right? Anyone in the world should be concerned about that. And the more we can talk about it, that could help promote security. Even if you know that, I'm probably not a target, I'm still going to update my phone because this bothers me that it exists. I don't know. That's kind of my view of it.
Which, by the way, like the convenience factor of it, you just click a button.
I know, it's so
That's
easy.
it. Just click the button.
My phone starts over. I had all those notifications saved, and it's going to turn off and back on. I'll lose them.
But it's when you're asleep,
what I love
right?
about this is what I love about cyber is you can take like such a seemingly like kind of trivial topic or something that doesn't seem like a huge deal and just extrapolate, and it's this, massively existential thing, like trying to
Right.
solve for world hunger.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, going back to my practitioner life, I ran the patch management for, let's just say, 15,000 endpoints at one point. And the number of people that got very upset that we forced a reboot on their computer was just astronomically high. And they're like, oh, you shouldn't have rebooted my computer. I'm like, well, we warned you 18 times, and this has been overdue for 45 days. You ignored the emails. You ignored the phone call. I came to your desk. You weren't there. I don't know what else I was supposed to do. Like, we had to reboot the computer, and like, I had a very critical document open. It's a usability thing. I think it's a user experience thing. I don't know how to solve it. I think, right, the emergency updates from Apple, they're very quick right now, right? So it like installs very quickly, and then the phone's back up, and there's really not a lot going on. So I think the separation of like OS level updates from the security updates in those use cases helps mitigate some of the risks that you're all talking about. The convenience factor, right? It's just done, and they don't have to think about it. But some of like the longer updates can take 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And if you live your life and do your business by your phone, that can be kind of a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder if anyone watching has an opinion on who won, because I don't know if we can judge for ourselves since we all have our own
I can
opinions.
absolutely judge on who won.
Oh, yeah.
It was me.
Write in the chat, because I feel like we're not able to judge of ourselves.
Oh, can we see the chat live?
Yes,
So
it's on the right. You can
yeah.
click chat, and it
yeah,
should show.
no one has chimed in. Oh, actually, I just saw somebody write in. Drew was correct.
You're making that up. I don't
I
see
am,
that.
in fact, making that up. If I type it, does that become it Drew? Oh, I went over 20. I went over by.
Lost on a technicality, Drew.
All
Sorry,
right.
bud.
I will gladly donate to the earthquake relief affecting Morocco. Absolutely, that's an easy W. I'll gladly donate my $60 for the 60 seconds. By the way, it's 60 seconds. Yeah.
I think
Did I
I need to
do something
donate
different?
62 because of
Yeah.
your malfeasance. And I will
Indeed.
too.
Well,
We're
thank you.
all winners.
Let the record show, by the way, that Katie Brown is now undefeated for the
Wow, that's
second thing.
well done, Katie. Well done.
Yes, bravo. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I know we want to get to our next story because I'm dying to know what Katie's opinion and Haley's opinion and Drew's opinion as well. I don't want to leave Drew out. I want to know all your opinions about this story. So let's go ahead and roll the deep dive clip.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
Okay, so this story was kind of cool to get a little bit of a behind the scenes look at how the State Department was first alerted to the Storm 0558 compromise. And this is a China-linked threat actor that was able to leverage a signing key to access the emails of several high-profile U.S. government officials. Very concerning, obviously. We learned how a Microsoft engineer's account was compromised. The adversary found this signing key in a crash dump. So there were a number of security failures along the way that should have been in place here. So it's a great case study in like advanced persistent threats and these types of attacks. But we learned in this report from Politico that the State Department actually started working with Microsoft 2 years ago to develop this alert that they called the Big Yellow Taxi. And that's what actually alerted them to this initial access by this threat actor to the State Department's email accounts that are hosted by Microsoft. And so this was created 2 years ago. And there was some interesting information about how they had, a handful of false positives over the years. And then recently in mid-June, when this happened, they got a cluster of alerts, and the volume of that stood out to them. And they're like, okay, we should look into this. This doesn't seem right. But one of the former cybersecurity officials at the State Department was quoted in this article as saying that a lot of times these discoveries kind of are luck-based, right? Like sometimes you're getting a lot of alerts and it can be hard to discern what's real, what's not, what should be prioritized. And I'm curious, Katie, like with your background in a SOC type of environment, looking at all of these alerts, what do you make of this? Does this align with what your experience is with going through that?
I have lived and breathed this. So and this is when I was a newer analyst too, but essentially the standard operating procedure for alert triage in the environment is open up the SIM, You're going to see thousands, potentially tens of thousands of alerts in a day through the course of your shift. Just, work on the ones that seem critical.
Well, what does that mean?
I'm
Like, what seems critical?
Yeah, it really was like, I hope that each of our SOC analysts has enough security domain expertise to be able to pick the exact right one, but like obviously like not sustainable, and like stuff was missed probably all the time,
Right.
So RBA.
Yes, Haylee,
Oh
tell us
yeah, I
about
don't have
this.
to say it. Thank you for the alley oop. I mean, I think it's every SOC is going to try and manage the madness differently. Because yes, some places are doing the like scour the just scour in there and sort of look around and make decisions. And other places are like, well, we only alert on these things, and when the alert comes in, you work it, but that place, that style also has the disadvantage of like, well, are you alerting on things that like you're alerting on the things you're alerting on, but you don't know what you don't know type stuff.
There it is.
And I mean, for both of these situations, risk-based alerting is great because like when I think about this, and even like the Okta attacks I mentioned, like first time seen is an incredibly useful like analysis thing, like when you're placing events next to each other in a timeline, like first time new device and then weird activity. And there's just like trying to do that without something that aggregates and abstracts what's happening, and then reporting an abstraction of things in a timeline. It's really difficult. Sometimes it's from one tool, but sometimes you need the context from another tool. Like it's that Okta sign in from first time new device, but then it's the anomalous cloud traffic from shared drives. It's the pairing of those two things together.
Yep. And identifying potential ahead of time, right? Because in this scenario, the analyst that created this like tripwire thought 2 years ago that there was this potential security gap with having an unidentified application that connects to cloud email services, right? And so thinking ahead of time, can we create an alert to trigger when something like this happens? I mean, but then again, they also had some false positives. So being able to discern, the volume looks different or different characteristics about an alert, right? I mean, that can make a difference too.
I think this is also a play for the necessity, not the nice to have, but the necessity of needing some type of orchestration tool in your environment. Because like I've worked in environments before where there were absolutely, certain types of alerts and phishing investigations where someone had to do it, but there was such a vast amount of them. And like none of us really wanted to do any of those because, it's the grunt work. But they have to get done. So, I think there's the play for orchestration.
Right.
Yeah. I'm really just disappointed that I've spent the last 5 minutes not paying attention to anything that any of you said, and I've been trying to come up with a pun to like talk about like putting up like paving paradise and putting up a parking lot or something after talking about Big Yellow Taxi. If you could see my screen, you would see that I've got the lyrics over here on the right, and I've fundamentally got nothing to discuss. But I think going back to the point about luck, right? How do you, right? There's some phrase about like luck is like opportunity and like preparedness or something, right? And with that, like when you hit that inflection point, it's super important. And so I think having an approach that allows you to have more opportunities to have good luck is probably a strategy for success, right? Like a first time seen detection is probably not going to be something you want analysts investigating every single time. That's not what I wanted my analyst looking at, right? But that would have been a fantastic observation to then, as you were saying, Haylee, right, and having a timeline that happened, then this other thing, right? That makes that kind of case significantly easier. So it's super cool. Super appreciative of the State Department folks that ended up doing this. They got lucky, and what's wild to me, right, is we'll never know their names. Mm-hmm. Right? Like the people that like literally got Microsoft to like give out free stuff and, this attack. Like they're just the unsung heroes are probably sitting in a basement of some like brick building in DC somewhere, maybe out in Maryland. Meanwhile, the directors of every federal civilian agency are getting to talk about this. But I guess my hat's off to the unsung heroes of the defender world across, right? The hackers always get their names in the paper, but the defenders don't. So thank you for, I guess, securing freedom and democracy around the world.
Really, I mean, there's a quote in this article. It says, the State Department's actions likely prevented Beijing from granting more extensive access to the private communications of key U.S. officials amid an intense period of diplomacy between the world's two largest economies. So it's definitely not an insignificant situation here that was caught, where it could have easily gone undetected if this analyst hadn't thought to create this 2 years ago. So it's not fully luck, right? If they hadn't, created this, then we'd probably be talking about something different today. So, yeah, it's an interesting story, and just every week we learn more about this incident. So it's just fascinating to kind of follow along as things come out. But I think, do you have any other thoughts? Anything else we want to add? Because I think that is our last story for today.
I just want to see Haley's coffee mug one more time.
Is it the llama one?
Oh,
feel
it's
like
an alpaca?
Alpaca. Okay, sorry,
Excuse me?
alpaca.
Get it
Sorry.
right, Audra.
There's a difference.
Okay, I'm happy. That's all I needed.
when you and David were on the show, you had the same mug, and I think I called it a llama then too. So
It's my go-to. Yeah, maybe third time's the charm. Someone will recognize the properly weird but adorable animal.
Well, Haley, thank you so much for coming on with your alpaca mug. Katie, as always, thank you so much for taking the time. And Drew, we're going to miss you when you're gone, but you'll have to stay in touch and let us know how you're doing. And we'll have Daniela on for our next live stream. Next week, we're going to have a pre-recorded interview, and I believe it's going to be Sherry DeGrippo at Microsoft with Threat Intelligence over at Microsoft. We're going to hear from her. Ryan Kovar sat down with her for an interview. So I'm really looking forward to that next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific. Be sure to tune in. And then the following week, I believe it'll be Mick and Ryan are back for another live stream. So with that, we'll go ahead and say goodbye, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye, friends.
Surge.